work for Union Forages now. And with that in mind, I feel very fortunate to work with people like Khalil and Nassima. And I know you at the Battle River Research Group are in good hands. And since I've got such a love for the Forage and Applied Research Associations across the province, as many of you know me, um, I certainly am always excited when you've got good people in place, and you do. So with that, the working with Khalil and Nassima has been very enjoyable. I'm working with Union Forages now, but Khalil and Union Forages' idea is let's educate our customers and other people so that forages as an industry wins. And with that in mind, that's how I'm going to do this presentation. So it's not a Union Forages biased presentation to the best of my ability. And we're going to talk a little bit about all the wonderful work that Khalil and Nassima and the Battle River Research Group is doing. And with that, dwell a bit on the background to the annuals and the perennials. But one of the things I'm going to start you off a little bit more with is a bit of a baseline of where we're coming from. And to me, this is where it's really important. When we start looking at Alberta forage production, when I looked at statistics, I was disappointed. I know silage production, and I don't have it here, so my apologies. But it is something like not looking at what you get in your trials for RVTs and other things, but the averages for the province are about 7.7 tons of barley silage, about 7.8 of oats. That's wet at 65% moisture. When we start looking at that, we realize there's a huge range. And why is that range there? Why is that occurring there? And if we look at the grazing side of things, we get further disappointed, and especially with high land prices and charging $1 in a day for pasture rent or other things, and knowing that land is being taken by the cereals and oilseeds producers, and I don't mean to treat them as bad or negatively, it's just that's the fact. It competitively is, and we need to be competitive. And I honestly believe we can in so many ways. And we're going to share in this presentation a little bit why Khalil's doing and Battle River's doing some of the work you're doing, and why I encourage you to support them entirely, because I think, and I have always believed them to be on the right track. And I've been vocal if I don't think they are, but through all my time and working with people, I've been excited about seeing where they're going. So when we start looking at these average yields, we realize that, you know what, there's room for improvement, and there always is. So how can we learn and how can we improve from there? The other thing is when we start looking across this province, people will say, well, you know, depending on where you are in the province, well, if it doesn't rain, I'm sorry, that is a bad excuse for forage production in my mind. I can always agree with you on the fact if it doesn't rain. But the fact also is, when we look at the ranges people are getting, when we look in fact at the economics and what is occurring from, just a lower battery here, I might have to switch something. Once we start looking at what we've got coming through, from the standpoint of what some producers are getting with the agri-profits data that the province had been doing, and I trust will do in the future. But all said and done, we're trying to make sure that, I'm just adjusting this computer because it's giving me a battery sign, so I hope I have. Khalil, I can I hear you? Can you still hear me? Is everything good?
Yeah, everything is good. Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome, sir.
So when we look across this province, yes, rain is crucially important, but I have studied this. And those of you that know me, I'm really tenacious with things, to my wife's dismay. But I like to understand where I'm coming from. And the fact is, moisture is crucial for forage production, but even in a drought, nitrogen is more crucial in the short term than moisture. Yes, nitrogen is more crucial than moisture in the short term of a drought. And why is that? Because it feeds the plants. The plants use that for root growth and other things. In other words, we're back to a plant, and why that plant can do things for us and how our management can do things for us. This in 2012 was earth-shattering to me in my little world that I'd lived in for so long. I'd always been taking my courses at university. I'd always taken home this message, and I don't really want to say that a professor told me this. It's really what I was thinking in my own mind is that, yeah, soil grows plants, and that's really important. That's where we say water grows plants. But the fact is, Dr. Christine Jones did something at that Western Canadian Grazing Conference. She was a lady that I'd wanted to hear for many years, and when the group, Khalil and other partners asked me who I'd want to see at that conference, I said Dr. Christine Jones. And when she came to me, she gave me something that I was looking for so long. You know what? I was wrong. Soil and water grow plants. Plants grow soils. It's like putting your hat on backwards. What, in fact, are you seeing here? Because the point of it all is it's a different shift of mindset. Now, where we started looking at something, realizing we can take control versus just accept. And that's why I think it's so important with the morning's discussion on RVTs and other things. Plants grow soils, and it is green plants, higher yielding green, that is so crucial to growing soils. That's why corn can do such a good job. And when you look at corn, look at the yields it gets. It's got lots of bare soil between the rows and everything. But when it comes down to it, the yields are tremendous. And if the yields are tremendous, are they big enough? And I'm not going to say they're the best thing to grow at Battle River. I'll leave that up to you to decide. But at Forestburg area as such, the fact is, my point is, when I looked at this and started exploring it, I realized she was absolutely right, that we need to start looking at our pastures, our annual forages, and even our crop production in light of how can we have plants growing soils. And remember, when we looked at the soil types across the province, when we went back to that soils map, how did you get black soil in the county of Flagstaff, Camrose County? It came about, or Stettler for that matter, it came about based on the parent material that grew on that landscape in native range. And the parent material that grew on that landscape in native range converted that land over a long period of time to a black soil zone, a gray wooded soil zone, a brown soil zone where no matter what you do, it's hard to get yield because now, yes, water does affect the yield. And over time, it's hard to improve soil if you can't improve yield. So again, to me, this is crucial. This is where I started to look at forages and take a few steps back. And taking a few steps back meant a step underground as well. And that's where so much of the involvement we had Alberta Ag at that time had, and I with Sheila Nolan and a forage carbon team that we had been involved with in 2007 that I've been involved with it ever since until my time of leaving Alberta Agriculture this December. I'd worked with Sheila, and actually she even calls me now. But the point of it was we were looking at soil carbon because carbon and organic matter is 57%, and that's a scientifically discussionable even item, Dr. Ratan Lal once told me. And the point of that is organic matter and carbon are soil health, their soil quality, their plants growing soils so soils can truly be the reservoir. They can be the resource that buoys us up. So now my whole thinking is trying to manage that sunlight to green plant tissue to plant and what that plant does for its little friends down here. One thing that I kind of see almost wrong in some ways in the soil is when we look at organic matter from waste residue and metabolites and plants, animals, and microbes, the majority of soil organic matter comes through root exudates and plant roots. So root exudates and plant roots, the litter we see on the surface does contribute, but not as much as the exudates and plant roots. So now we're back to plants again and picking our plants to be important plants. One of the reasons why this, and I didn't to put big fancy names down. And when you look at the team you've got at Battle River, somebody like Nissima or Khalil have done work in this area. And that is these fancy terminologies are simply meaning unlocking the doors. Unlocking the door of discovery. Now beginning and other things, we all of a sudden been able to see things, electronic things, and see things happen where plants actually create an organism, and the organism getting away out. Do something like that. And then bring something back. So the revolution, I think, I would think, what Dr. Jones said to us back in 2012, even more today. Now we know that, yes, she's right. The point of it is, the science,
Hello. Hi, Grant. We are not able to hear you.
I'll need to go back to this past results. What learn.
Hello, Grant. We are not able to hear you.
Let's see if I can do something here.
No, we can't hear you.
I don't like to do anything that if I were to switch back, if I just say, each head, switch it.
Yeah, we are not able to hear you, Grant. I think the audience, they also have the same issue, I guess. Hi, Grant. Are you able to hear me? No, your mic is off. I cannot hear you. Yeah, I can see you now, but your mic is off.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. My apologies, everybody. I'm going to go back to share screen and see if that works. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, let me bounce back a couple of slides. Really ruined my presentation here, giving you all the tips. Okay, you're hearing me okay now, I presume?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, so what we're looking at now with these plants is really what these plants can do for us. And what does that plant do for us? And it's something that is really closely tied to what the trials are
that Khalil's got on the go with annuals, perennials, and some of the cocktails that we'll be talking about a little later. This was sent to me another day, and I'm also on the Western Stock Growers Association, helping them with some carbon work. So we're trying to stay at the forefront of learning here. And now my Mac's saying low power. I'm thinking that I can do this and get away with it. Khalil, am I still there?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I'm re-switching. Okay, hopefully this is still working. And another click, and hopefully that keeps working. Thank you so much, Khalil, and I apologize to everybody for my computer glitches and things. I'm working from home, of course, and that in other things. Improving that, how can soil carbon sequestration by plants be maximized, improve that soil food web? How can we improve it? Plants come in there, plant exudates, as we said, root mass, we said that, and even reducing compaction layers with plants doing that. And as I had the Great Wooded Forage Association out of my place doing soil tests last week, the infiltration was amazing considering how full my soil was with water. And yet I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, and I've worked on this for a long time, I hopefully am getting moved that way. But anyway, carbon sequestration. So when it does rain, we're going to hold that water. We're going to release it back as we need it. And lo and behold, we're going to gain more nitrogen, more soil fertility. And really, even for a consumer's sake, we got a good story to tell them with nutrient density. This is where we start looking at the cocktails or some of these annuals. And I put them together when I look at it because the basic annuals are huge still. Do not think they aren't. They are what we're building everything still around. And I'm looking at keeping you an effort to keep you in business with profit above. If we're not making profit, there is no future. There is no steward in stewardship. And I'm famous for saying those words. And no consumer gets what they want. We don't get what we want. And wealth below is crucial because I somehow have to build a bank account for my future where it's dry, where it's wet, to have land that can be productive. And the questions are really, in my own mind, not so much questions other than they are simply, as Khalil had mentioned to you earlier about this year being different or years being different. Yes, adapting, managing. And simply it means we have to be managing or adapting for profit above and wealth below, continue to be that. And it can be. And I thank you to many of the partners that I've worked with over time. Of course, you see, I even have down a number of players from the associations that have worked with me in the past in looking at annuals and how I looked at them. And that's certainly something I started doing, and I haven't got Battle River down here, but they weren't one of the contacts I had when I was doing this at the time. We look at functions and what the functional groups are in plants. And we know that, in fact, a lot of the plants that you've got in the silage trials and other places are, in fact, cool season grasses. So, yes, they're really important. The cool season grasses like barley, oats, triticale, wheat, all fit crucially into this system. And they do because they are great with the vascular arbomuscular mycorrhizal fungi. And that is truly, in my thinking, the high-speed internet of the soil. Works better than my internet today, so my apologies, but high-speed internet of the soil. So we feed that system, they travel a lot further than a difference of a depth of a root. They'll travel deeper than that and bring nutrients back to the plant. So that's why it's really important to realize. And so much of our previous science, we were stopping at root tips. We were stopping thinking that we should stop at litter and contribution to the ground pool, not thinking of soil biology. We missed it. And now when we're looking at it, a lot of what we've done needs to be rethought. And that's why I'm sharing with you rethinking, relearning too, because I won't apologize for changing what I say a year from now, a minute from now. If somebody tells me something that I find to be, when I check out, sound of thought and advice. And I will always be critical, but at the same time, I won't be foolish enough not to look at information as a resource to know if it can be, as my good friend Dwayne McCartney would say, creating knowledge. Anyway, the nitrogen fixers in the system, we're looking at them and the importance of them. And I know that, of course, we know that Nasima's work was at the Breton plots. And we know that Martin Entz, when he looked at the Breton plots, found that the red clover root channels were helping wheat yield growth potentially when he extrapolated back in Manitoba as a scientist, productive more yield to a depth below all the wheat 10 years after the red clover was there. Why 10 years after? Root depth and depth. You created a rail line that hasn't been taken out yet, if you want to call it, a paved road into the country. And the root crops, we're looking at them in every form, but it could be a sweet clover. It could be, in fact, a brassica. But we're looking at them as the nature of being a different component of the game. And that was something, then the warm season grasses, of course, which are a challenge to grow because we need that heat. And corn is a warm season grass. But as everything, you've got producers around that Camrose Forestburg area north that are even growing corn really well. So we're figuring out how to do that. So let me move on. And I'm presuming it's still going forward. Okay, alternatives. Now, these are some of the alternatives. And Khalil, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Welcome.
The alternatives in the trial that Khalil's looking at are a number of ones. These are different functional groups to some degree. When we start looking at the brassicas, lo and behold, folks, those are brassicas. Whether they're turnips, kale, or radishes, they are brassicas. And now my computer does a fast switch on me. Chicory, to my understanding, is not. Millet's a warm season plant. I can't tell you which family exactly plantain and I can't even say that, Phacelia come from. Sorghum Sudan is a warm season grass, like millet and like corn would be. Hybrid rye is, in fact, again, a cool season grass to my understanding. It isn't our fall rye, so don't think of it as a fall rye. It's hybrid rye, it's a different one. Anyway, so now these are some of the annuals that Khalil has been looking at and you guys have in your site. And with that, they're what you consider some of the new cocktail additions people have to the system. And they're bringing that different functional group to a normal cool season, barley silage, oat silage, green feed oats, tritic kale, swath grazing. Now we're looking at some of these cocktails and adding them because we want to add different functional groups. Different functional groups provide different soil exudates. Different soil organisms are fed by them. So now what you're trying to do is have more rural towns, if you want to call it, in rural Alberta. You're trying to keep them in business. So you're trying to keep more soil organisms in business working for you. So there's a little army being fed below ground, being right there, doing what they should. My apologies, I forgot to correct this, but these are the silage barleys Khalil's working with in the trial. And of course, they're exciting information because this is something that has been funded, and he'll tell you more about by who, but it's been something in the past. I know the Alberta beef producers that funded it, and keeping this all across the province with his partners so that you've got information to compare. And that's the beauty of it. And just because you see it works well here or there, it's always good to know what it's doing in your neighboring land. And we have many producers with land that's spread out. So when we start looking at this, and I'm sorry, Canmore is number 7 down here, but we start looking at these different varieties. We've got some that have been around for a while, and we've got some that are newer and are simply numbered varieties of barleys. But again, yield is important for barley, disease resistance is important because we still build our cocktail systems, if we're going to seed them, in around the cool season being at least a half of that stand or more. And that's important to remember. We are looking at, even with a cocktail, a strong, stable from a cool season species. So you're still looking at these as being true important species to the game and picking the ones that yield higher. The beauty of some of these are there's a bit of a left field one here, and we've got Nasser, which is a high fat oat. And the beauty of it is it doesn't have to be rolled, but to be a grain, it can be fed whole to cattle and do very well. So it allows us some more options. But we've got some very good green feed oat varieties. And with those green feed oat varieties in the system, some that are developed at Lacombe and other places around the province, and some grain ones that actually perform very well for forages. And so looking at the new ones and old ones, how do they compare? And again, oats does really well in so many places, as does barley. They have to be part of any annual forage game really around there. The triticales, and I missed that one already, the triticales, and now even all these are triticales except for these two soft white wheats. The soft white wheats, if many of you have been following the trials that have been published in the Alberta Seed Guide every year, you'll see that the associations have brought forward silage yields that show these wheat have been really productive and really good quality. Remember, we got to watch for disease rotations and everything, and fusarium and other things. Do we have to break rotation? Do we need to move? How far do we need to move out of species in fact, resistance or whatever we're playing with? Do we need to move to a triticale from a wheat? Do we need to break that rotation up as much? And mixtures do a great job of breaking up diseases. Years ago, I found in perennial forages, I could lose a monoculture orchard grass stand entirely in one winter, but I wouldn't lose the mixture of orchard grass if it was in with others at the same time in a neighboring stand. So again, mixtures they break up the disease cycle, they do other things to it. They're a catcher in the bullpen, getting ready, or pitcher in the bullpen, I guess it's better to say if we're baseball fans, ready to come in and be productive in a year where we're having a year like this with cool growing conditions so much. Again, the cool season species are at their strength. The brassicas don't perform as well with wet feet. And so again, we're looking there. We're looking for that long season of growth. And that was something when I worked with Dr. Barron and the late Don Salmons at Lacombe, and then Len Solik and Brian and Gary Corns and others on the triticales. We're excited to see there are people growing these, and they are long season green. We wanted this so bad in the oats with Dr. Solomon Kabiti prior to his passing. And then we realized we actually probably had it in the triticales. So Dr. Barron did a whole bunch of work there, as many of you are familiar with the triticale trials. And triticale is tremendous in quality and quantity. And that is one of the things that's found in so many ways as we look across the species and as we're looking and moving on. Now you go to more of the mixture trial, and this is maybe in some ways not quite a cocktail, or is it? A cocktail is a word that I've used, and Dr. Mike Schellenberg, who's a mentor to me, and he just retired this year too, and he'd say to me, Grant, it's the cocktail. Don't lose sight of that. And what he's really saying, I think he meant to say, and I hate to put words in his mouth, but he's always helped me, so I guess he doesn't think I put too many, is the multifunctional species. And that multifunction species feeding different soil biology, and in fact being a number of attributes to the system in varying ways to make the system, in fact, more resilient, more biodiverse. And that biodiversity is something we're really finding is the glue in a spider web. It is what we need so much in a soil into the future to truly build soil aggregates with glomalin and other things, build that soil health. And so we're looking at a cocktail, but when we look at that cocktail, my apologies there, I'm bouncing in the wrong spots. We're looking at adding in a legume. That's one big difference. And I'll share why this is important. The legume that's added in, and Khalil can tell you about rates he's been playing with and back and forth. And we still are fertilizing with nitrogen, don't get me wrong. we're looking at the legume for its nitrogen attributes, but also its taproot more attributes. And as we get into faba beans, and snowbird's a faba bean, Khalil informed me yesterday, so I made that change. Jasper and meadow are peas, but we're looking at a mixture. And the mixture you choose is important to go to Khalil and ask him, what rates did you seed at to know these yields? Because you're looking at rates too of these annuals, these cocktails, to make a bigger, stronger picture. It's not just saying, okay, I'm going to put half of one and half of another in. We do have to really watch, because we know that the cool seasons can be an elephant in the room, and they really fight the other species for a foothold. Oats and barley grow fast in the spring. They will try to be the strong game. And as you see here, as we're looking at some of the rye, as we're looking at some of the triticales with bobcat, as ACC wildfire, I hope it's a winter wheat. I guess I forgot to look at that. So is it a winter wheat, Khalil?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So what Khalil's looking at, this was work done in the 80s by Dr. Barron. Some of this is new, but we didn't look at it the way Khalil's trying to look at it, and you are in these trials. But Dr. Barron and Arvid Austin at Lacombe, Arvid and Myron wrote the forage manual. So again, you're looking at solid people with tons of experience, real mentors to all of us in the forages game. And I was fortunate enough to work side by side with them for 10 years in the same hallway. I think they both got tired of me, I'll tell you that. But all said and done, they taught me a lot. And that annual perennial is, again, percentage of it. Are we looking at it because we're looking at the strength? And this is where I really like the rise. We're forgetting fall rye and what it brought to the picture in eastern Alberta and other places. We're looking at the wheats, we're looking at the triticales. All of them are present. And if somebody has to sell us seed, where do we have to buy seed from? And so in doing some of this, lo and behold, we're looking at, in fact, an opportunity to look around, shop around, try different things, try what works best for us or not. And I hope you can't hear my dog barking. I think somebody came, so I'm going to ignore that and hope they don't get too disappointed with me. Anyway, all said, that we're looking at the combinations because we've got a silage cut, and on top of that silage cut, we've also got, in fact, what amounts to being also a regrowth crop, and that's what Dr. Barron and crew looked at it for. They were, in fact, looking at it so that it could be a crop that could go on to become a grazable crop afterwards, growing that season of green, a long season winter wheat, winter triticale, or even that matter spring. So as we're looking here, we're seeing the mixtures here. And as I'm looking at these mixtures, I'm starting to realize that I said something wrong, because these are spring and it's not a winter spring. So I really boobed up here, didn't I? I think I've got that wrong in terms of saying that something like Taz is a winter trit, something like Baylor and Austin are spring varieties. And so I'm kind of going off track a little bit, but in so doing, keep that in the back of your mind that you are dealing with what is the situation of looking at combining these things in attributes and hopefully getting further ahead. Now to the perennial side of things. What we're looking at here is, in fact, what I really look at as we're going towards perennials, that I don't want people to lose sight of some principles. And in the trials, Khalil's going to share with you some of the things he's looking at with species. But the first thing I've always looked at in principle in a pasture mixture, in some ways is cocktail, as we're talking, maybe you'd say, or in other ways, maybe it is more of attributes, functional groups, or what they bring to the picture. And so where we in Alberta agriculture used to talk about just, okay, seed that to meadow brome. It is a rapid regrowth grass, go with it. I never did support that really. And it was something that I was always adding to the picture when I thought that I should, in fact, be looking at, whoops, I'm going wrong here, looking at having a mix. We're looking at really, when we're starting with a pasture, not losing sight of, we want that 30 to 60% legume in most of these pastures. They have to pay some bills. And in so doing, with the attributes they've got, we need those yields. We need that nitrogen being added in that system. We need that taproot versus all the rapid regrowth grasses I pretty well know are more of a fibrous bunch root. There is some that are creeping, but not so many. And so we're adding different, and not all legumes are tap roots, but a lot of them have a tap even when they creep. So we're looking at a legume and why it's being added, and people all of a sudden start talking about bloat. But you know what? Khalil's got that covered in the trial that we'll talk about in a minute. I want a creeping grass. That creeping grass to me is in fact crucially important, and it's showing up pretty late here on the screen, but the idea of a creeping grass is because it protects the soil with all these rains and everything. I need carpet. I need something in the game that's not going to allow a hoof to go down and take all the oxygen out of pores and soil pores. I want soil pores to remain intact. I want the spring in the stand. I want, if I do tramp it into the ground and get the heck off of there, it's going to come back hard and fast, not be like it would in a stand that's a mono functioning stand. It took me 3 years for a stand to come back when meadow brome, alfalfa, and timothy was together on a high clay soil, and a huge rain came, animals milled, tramped, and that stand stayed pugged, damaged for 3 years and recovered slowly. I had a stand that was just abysmal with damage that had a creeping species in it, and 2 years ago, or 2 years after it happened, that creeping species brought that productivity so high back on that stand, and it was a bale graze stand, that I could negotiate with an oilic acid company and make them pay me grain crop rates. That was how fast that stand came back compared to the other stand. Important components too. You don't need a lot, but you need some, in my opinion. Protect that soil. Root variation. I'm looking at root depth. So now I'm starting to take what Christine Jones talked about with those plants, the idea even of cocktail groups in annuals. Why are we thinking about them in perennials? I'm now looking at root variation in the stand. Why don't I plant a grass with a deeper root? And I listened to Grant, and he just said there's an internet of the soil. There's no need to do it. Well, yes, there is and isn't. I know that if we're feeding it with high yield, we're certainly going to be feeding a deeper soil profile and good management. But at the same time, I want those root channels to be down deeper. I'd like some paved roads down there, if you don't mind, please. If I'm driving out to Forestburg, I'd rather drive on pavement versus gravel. And that to me is one of the things what the taproot does. I'm also looking at growth and timing. So that's some of the mentality around the perennials trial that Khalil's involved with. We're looking at there, going ahead and trying to have a number of components that are all part of this trial for discussion. And so we're looking at a long season. And this back in, if I have it right, 1995 was an article that was written by, oh my goodness, I forgot his name, right? Larry Thomas in the Cattleman magazine about Norm Ward. And it was called A Grass for All Seasons. And I thought, what? A grass for all seasons? It was Norm Ward's mixed grazing pasture with holistic managed grazing, adaptive multi-paddock grazing. Yes, that's what Norm did. And I know Norm well, so he did. And the fact is, Larry Thomas found that Norm said, that's a pasture for all seasons for me. And you know what? He's right. It was for him. This is the objects of that perennial forage variety trial that Khalil's part of, and a number of groups are across the province. And I've stole this from Diane Westerlin from Chinook. She's been the lead on this. Thank you, Diane, so much. She is one of your huge leaders in this province. If Diane wasn't here in this province, you guys would be in big trouble. And even the forage research in Canada has noted Diane has stepped up for it. So don't think a small voice within your association can't be a big thing. And certainly your partners like Diane, and this involvement with Battle River in this bigger project means all of Alberta can speak together. And that's something I know Manitoba and Saskatchewan were asking for of me just prior to me leaving the department. Why can't we work together, Grant, across 3 provinces? And you guys are going to do that. We're looking at more than just perennial forages. We're looking at a number of things that are crucially important in it. Some of this has been discussed, and I'm going to emphasize to you, I was in an earlier webinar this spring where we talked about mixtures and establishment, and I can't go back there to be too redundant, but I'm not going to forget what was shared in that presentation, so we know we're building on it. And I did share a couple slides from that past presentation, but you really have to remember to always watch these webinars, go back to them as Khalil records them, as Battle River does for you, and put them together and say, okay, what was Grant really saying? And because you know what? That's exactly what I found with all the years with Dr. Barron at Lacombe. I'd turn around and go back to him and ask him another question. And he'd say, no, Grant, I didn't say that. I said the. And I thought, oh, that is different. But the point of it is, when I heard it the second time, then I realized learning comes in steps. I need to gain learning at different levels to truly become knowledgeable. And that's why Dwayne McCartney built things like foragebeef.ca, and that's where the Beef Research Council's been working on it, Beef Cattle Research Council, to bring things forward so it's steps of learning. This project is looking at yield, but it's looking more than yield. It's looking at taking that yield and looking at it in light of what it can truly mean. Subsampling, looking at forage evaluation for quality and other things in the trial. And it's an ongoing project that's going to need multiple years of work. And that's where it's looking to be a solid long-term trial. In your trial at Battle River, and I stole these slides, thank you to Farming Smarter very much. I just helped them with a webinar a little bit ago, and we talked about their variety trials, which are the same as yours, another one of those partnerships. So here's the jump on what it could look like if it could have got planted earlier this year. Khalil will share that with you. But looking at 11 different grass species planted that all have potential. And we're looking at the meadowbromes. We're looking at hybrid brome, which extensive work in Saskatchewan showing for very good forage quality. And I've got to be wrapping up, so I should be moving along here. And we're also looking at the orchard grasses because they are amazing in terms of having that rapid regrowth as well, but not losing sight of things that are salt tolerant, like this AC Saltlander. As soon as we get a little more of that, I can't even think of the word for it. I'll think of downy brome out of it. It just got trace amounts in it, but I worked on a fact sheet that is coming out shortly and has come out, my apologies. But the advantage of it is in fact that we've got something that is a salt tolerant species with pelletability. We've got something that grows in dry conditions very well. And we've got, computer wants to change on me, but all said and done, we've got even Timothy back in the picture, and I'm not sure what the last one was. That's my apologies. I think there's something wrong with this name, but Khalil will clarify for you when he gets there. Tall fescue too, and I myself do have tall fescue at my place. Courtney's a Canadian variety, has been around a long time, and it's met the test of time. When managed well, these species and orchard grasses, you've got to be careful with orchard grasses. Pick excellent hardiness in every variety except for Canadian ones, where Canadian ones you can truly get away with very good. But if it isn't excellent in other varieties, be careful. Because as my brother just shared with me, and he's up at Willingdon, he lost his after a year. I hate to say this, sorry people, but it was Potomac, and Potomac does not have hardiness. And that is something we know. And why do you want to plant it? I don't want to. So I want something that's hardy. Orchard grass, pick your poison there, but I love orchard grass in a mix, but pick the right one. The alfalfas, the sandfoins, the Siserian milk vetch. Remember, sandfoins and Siserian milk vetch do not cause bloat. Then this idea of bloat. Well, you know what? Who are you talking about? 3 of these don't even cause bloat. In fact, one of them is an organic bloat control, for goodness sakes. Didn't you hear about Sandfoin? But it's picking hardy Canadian varieties. Alberta is the leader here. Dr. Surya Cherry at Lethbridge has bred these. You do want his varieties. You don't want somebody else's. You want something that's got hardiness in Canadian conditions. And Khalil and Battle River were part of that experiment for 5 years we had on the go, and looking at hardiness and longevity and the Sandfoins and where they grow. You can pick and choose, but the only comment I make back to people about picking and choosing, you've got forage you pick, and you had a webinar to help you with that. I worked on that. Be careful. You can't just put forage in a box. It is a helpful tool, but then when somebody says, Khalil, do you think Sandfoin would work for me? Khalil would turn around and say, you know what? One of my counterparts that I worked with in the past, Dr. Akeem Amonkehe out of the Peace Country Beef and Forage Grove, he has Sandfoin that lasted for 4 to 5 years really well. In fact, out at Fairview. Fairview's not black soil. It's not high pH. It's 5.4 pH. Why? Again, some of these have attributes, reseeding ability, and beyond that with Sicer, and now you're into varieties. Sicer is a variety that reseeds itself quite readily. It's rhizomatous, but it's got a crown too. And when we start looking at the Sandfoins, people will say to me, well, Grant, how long do they live? Well, for somebody like Akeem, he found it was still 4 to 5 years. And I think they took the stand out of production, but 20% Sandfoin still left in it. But would it have lasted longer? At what rate? And remember, 20% is still quite a bit of a stand. Anyway, we've got all these alfalfas, the low bloat alfalfa, lower bloat, I should say. I apologize, it's not low bloat, lower. And we've also got a variety that's a yellow blossomed, Siberian. And there might be discussion on bloat on this one because there is something about the protein A and B fractions that the yellow blossomed has potential for a little lower bloat, possibly no bloat, organic bloat control in these 2 varieties of hardy Sandfoin from Dr. Surya Churia's program. Hardy Sandfoins. Longevity in Sandfoin largely is going to come through seed set and keep them going. Now we look at the mixture. This is the cocktail and the perennial, and I'm wrapping it down, Cleo, so sorry for taking a little bit long. We're looking at combining those mixtures, and this was what the trials looked at down at Lethbridge, and you're combining mixtures to see what it does, how it performs when it's got buddies with it, these buddies that are with it, and even up to 3 species. So now you've got an organic bloat control, 20% of Sandfoin, and if it was 80% alfalfa, bloat would be minimized to very low levels, levels that my brother at Wellington thinks nothing of grazing and quite happily would graze. I myself would be worried, and he laughed at me because he's grazed for years. And when you can put 100 extra pounds on your calves, and yes, that's the data, it's 99, Wayne Gretzky's number we found just from putting a legume in our tank, if you want to call it, we realized we could never go back. And Benny never has. He's always had high legumes in his pastures, and those pastures can pay bills. And I'm going to have to wrap pretty quick here. All I wanted to say, this is a mix in itself. More important as we go into those needs for salinity and other things. The yellow blossomed alfalfa, not just your conventional alfalfa, what a Sicer milk vetch looks at, and it's truly for grazing. I think this would be exciting for haying because now you can add a non-bloating organic bloat control to an alfalfa in a hay stand. And now you've got a high quality hay that is in fact got an organic bloat control in it. So if I were to seed alfalfa with 50% Sandfoin, I'd probably start there, or even 60. Lo and behold, over a life of 4 or 5 years stand, maybe less, I've got hay that's second cut organically, not a concern about bloat. Beautiful. Take home message to this, I think it's really important. It is important to go ahead and keep the yields, keep the functional groups present in thought for growing green, longer season, various feeding of organisms, biodiversity, and that keep with minimum till, we're trying to keep so many of that Martinensis red clover tracks deeper in the soil, keep that highway into the soil, keep that old rail track in place at Hardisty so you could load producer cars. And that's one of the things you find when you get out and the interesting things that happen over time. Minimum till is one of those advantages. And now I'm going ahead of myself. And don't forget to keep relearning. I really mean this. I'm a member of I don't know how many of the forage and applied research groups. I watch what they do because they're always doing neat and different things. You owe it to yourself to be their member, to support them as they lead the extension and research charge in Alberta now, and have in the past stepped up to the plate and done that, and take full advantage. Khalil, I'll end there. Thank you.